of children's rights in the focus of international social work. For this purpose, we have invited international guests, which is why we will hold the Erfurt dialogue in English for the first time. My name is Jörg Fischer. I work as a professor for educational concepts and head of the study program for international social work here in Erfurt, Germany. Today, I have the pleasure of moderating this event. In the Erfurt dialogue, we discuss online a current topic from the field of child and youth welfare. We always invite guests to discuss these topics with us. Today, too, we have interesting guests with us, whom I would like to introduce in a moment. But before I do, I would like to give you some organizational information about the process, so that you know what to expect and how you can get involved. At the beginning, we will give our three guests the opportunity to contribute with input from their perspective, and then we will have the opportunity for discussion. To them goes to cordial invitation to contribute with their questions, with your questions and comments using the chat function. I will try to incorporate those into this discussion. And on the topic, the strengthening of children's rights is tied into a certain idea of childhood, the role of the child in society and the social framework. It is exciting to see how well social work succeeds in engaging with this. With this perspective of international social work, we will discuss these approaches, the challenges and the possibilities for social work. I'm looking forward to the discussion of this topic and especially to the guests. We welcome Professor Rosica Simenova. She's Professor for Management in Social Work at the Sofia University in Bulgaria, and she's working at the Department of Social Work, the Faculty of Education. Rosi is a long-term partner in international relations of social work. A warm welcome, Rosi, nice that you are here. Second, I want to welcome Christine Rehklau. She's Professor for Diversity and Intercultural Social Work at the University of Applied Science in Erfurt, and she's responsible for international affairs of the whole university. Thank you that you are here, Christina.
Good evening to everyone.
And Professor Sajid from the Jamia Millia Islamia Delhi University in India. Sajid is social work professor, now in retirement, but still in business, and I'm so happy that he is teaching human rights work in our master program, International Social Work, here in Erfurt. Nice that you are here, Sajid.
I'm happy to be here. Good evening, everyone.
So then let's start with our first inputs, and I would suggest that Rosie is starting with her input, then followed by Christine, and then at the end, then Sajid. Rosie, we are not able to hear you. Your microphone is still off. No, it doesn't work until now. No.
Do you hear me now?
Yes, now it's fine.
Sorry about that. But thank you once again, Jörg, for the invitation. It is my pleasure to participate in this webinar. What I could share about the child rights in Bulgaria, maybe in short. Actually, it is one of the strategic policies we have in Bulgaria for the last 20 years, since the law on child protection was introduced in 2200. So since then, all the governments in Bulgaria are working actively on introducing and implementing the child rights in Bulgaria by several main activities. First, we have passed strategy on child protection, and it is with 10 years period of time, and the last one finished in 2019. And since then, we are in the process of accepting a new strategy for child protection. And it was an effort of many groups working involved in that, like NGOs, the governmental agencies, and unfortunately, there are some groups in our society which we could describe as more conservative ones, which have some objections to this more, let's say, bigger involvement of child rights into the social policy. And due to these objections and from some of these groups, this new strategy is not still implemented. But still, as a teacher in social work at the university for many years, I could say and share my personal opinion that child rights are in the agenda of Bulgarian government for the last 20 years, and we achieved bigger and better situations for the children, including child rights in our country. So I could say more about it in our further discussion. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Rosie. And then Christine, what about the situation in Germany?
Yeah, when I was preparing myself for this discussion, I was thinking what would be interesting to talk about the childhood in Germany in comparison to other countries as well. And I think what's quite unique, especially in Europe, that children are the minority in societies these days. So I was looking up how much of the population is below 18 years, and it's only 13%. So it's a really, really small proportion of the population is below 18. And if we look at the people above 65 years, it's 22%. So old people are even outnumbering young people. And I think this kind of shift in society towards old people, you can also feel like in child politics and how much discussion is around child rights in politics. And just because mostly the voters are having quite an old age and are not really in favor of young people, because even families kind of belong to a minority these days. I think what's also quite interesting that these days we have like 70% of the kids are growing up in married families, like where the parents are married, 70%. So it means the same time 30% are not married, either still living together or single parents. So it's quite a big proportion now that are not having this kind of standard childhood we had a couple decades ago. Also, this diverse concepts of parenthood, we also find diverse concepts in regard to the cultural backgrounds of children. So we're having quite diverse childhoods. We can say now up to 1/3 of families, parents either migrated themselves or they have a foreign passport. So they might have been born in Germany in the 2nd or 3rd generation, but still there's a different cultural background. So in more and more families, we have like a family language that's not the same as the language they have to talk in kindergarten or school. And that's also quite interesting if you come to social work, that the childhood is not only diverse in regard to parenthood, how they grow up, but also in regard to the language, to culture and all of that. We do see that the more and more kids are going to institutions from a quite early age, like kindergarten, early daycare is from the first year. It's by law, you have to get a place in kindergarten. So we find that by the age of 3, over 90% of kids are in institutions. So I think we can see that there was quite a, how should I say, that government can reach out to many, many children from an early age on. And in regard to education, it would be possible from an early age on, but what we talk later about is it really possible with the resources we give as a society? Also, the mandatory schooling, it's 9 years now in Germany. We have a school system that is lacking in regard that there's not really an inclusive school system, even though the Child Rights Convention is asking for it, and also the Convention for the Disabled People is asking for it, but inclusion is not really in educational systems right now. What else? Maybe in regard to socioeconomic well-being, most of the families are really well off, even though we have 20% of children growing up in poverty. But we also have a lot of family who are having quite a lot of money, also due that children are born into families quite late. So on average, men are 35 years when they have the first child. So that's quite late. Women are 29. So we do have kids who have a really economically well-being situation. They have like all the possibilities in life, but we also have kids that have like almost no perspective because there's no income or not enough income in their families. And maybe I think the last thing I would want to say now, what is quite unique, we got something is called Kindergeld. It's child benefit. So every family would get for every child every month a certain amount of money. Right now it's 250 euros, so it's quite a lot. And it doesn't depend if you have a high income or not. So it's not kind of a subsidy. Every family gets it. Except the poorest portion of the population, they are not getting it. It's quite a strange system. So me as a professor, I would get this benefit for my kids, but someone else who is having living in poverty is not getting it. So I think this is quite a strange idea, but government gives a lot of money into this child benefit. Yeah, so maybe that's enough for now, and we can discuss later.
Thank you, Christine. Then last but not least, let's go to India. Sajid, what do you think about this topic?
Yeah. I will briefly present the scenario in India, which is quite different from the rest of the developed world. And that is why I would like to focus on the contextual realities, socio-economic realities, and the conditions in which the children, most of them, they do live and they do survive. The very concept of childhood is still largely governed by the principle of control and authority as far as the adult to child relationship is concerned. So that is also supported to a large extent by the social values, which are largely seen in the form of self-sacrifice, self-discipline, concern for others, and non-violence, etc. And these different values have different kind of an impact on the social behavior of the adults as also the children. Who is a child is a difficult question to answer in the Indian context because there is no uniform definition or the age. For different purposes under different legislations, different age is prescribed below which the persons are considered to be children. Like it starts from below 7 to below 18, and in some cases below 21. So that is also a problem. Different policies, different legislations, different programs have different definitions of children, and there is a lack of uniformity. As far as the international standards are concerned, UN Convention, the covenants, India has been a signatory to all these. The Constitution of India also placed enough importance on the children's and their welfare and development. But I think the approach largely, except for the last 2 decades, has been more in the form of welfare rather than rights. So the needs-based kind of an approach to welfare-based approach, to development-based approach, to rights-based approach, to entitlements-based approach have been the different shades through which the issues and problems and concerns of the children have been viewed in India. If I give you a very quick glance at what the situation is, you will find 250 million people living in extreme poverty in India, and women and children are the worst sufferers, obviously. And when we talk about children and the proportion of children in the total population, if we take under 18 years, they are 444 million population consists of the children under 18. Which is roughly 32-33% of the total population. Under 14-year age is the 25.7% of the total population is under 14 years, which is quite in contrast with the developed world. if you look at the basic requirements needed for the healthy growth and development of children, physically and also psychosocial, nutrition, if you talk about 2 out of 5, that is 39% are under the age of 5 are stunted. 1.3 million children die every year before the 5th birthday. That is the under 5 mortality rate, which is 43 per 1,000 live births. If we talk about the infant mortality rate, this is 35 per 1,000 live births every year. 6 million children remained is out of school. 6 million. And this is after the government amended the constitution in 2001 and made the right to education a fundamental right, where the parents and others are obligated to send their children to school till the age of 14 years. But still a large number of children are out of school. 30% of women in 22 to 24 age group got married before the age of 18 years, which is the minimum legal age for getting married. So that is the status of particularly the girls, and the girls considered to be a burden on the family. And the sex ratio is also an indicator. There are less number of women born. There are legal instruments where prenatal detection of the sex is prohibited by law, because there were large number of cases of female infanticide and female feticide, which has resulted in a very skewed kind of a sex ratio in several provinces and several states of the country. But still, I think there is marginal improvement, but still we are way back in terms of this. Child labor is a major issue. 12 million children in the age group of 5 to 12 are in child labor. Even today, immunization, if you talk about the health, like 12 to 23 months, which is a very critical age for the children as far as immunization is concerned, is only 65% after a lot of improvement has been seen during the past several years. But every second child born in the poorest of the household do not receive full immunization. Like the first child might be getting better attention, but when it comes to the second child, most of them are not getting the full immunization. So you can imagine the susceptibility to some of the major diseases like diphtheria, measles, and others. There are 13.7 million slum households in India, and largely, if you look at the average size of the family, 4 children per household, you can imagine 13 million multiplied by 4 is the number of children who are living in deprived kind of conditions in slums, which are socially, psychologically, and physically very, very dangerous for the development of children. If the data is a bit old, but this will only give a trend to you if I say that more than 89,000 crimes were reported against children in 2014, which was against 59,000 in 2013. So in 1 year, there has been almost the number of cases of violence against children has increased. So I'll stop here because I can go on with more data, which I don't want to really overburden you. But the whole idea is there are governmental efforts in the recent past. There is at this federal level, there is a Ministry of Women and Child Development, which is there to monitor, to introduce schemes for child development and implement these schemes. There are ministries at the provincial level, state level, there are several programs. But I think the larger change at the level of the population, at the level of the community, at the level of masses is still to take place. And that is a challenge for social work interventions, both at the macro level as also meso and micro level. Thank you very much.
Thank you very much, Sajid. Thank you, dear colleagues, for your first input. And it's very interesting to see how the situation is in your country. And there are, of course, different levels of problems, different levels of challenges. But you described together that children live in a situation of change, that some things, some factors in the circumstances of living has changed and are changing in your country. And before I ask my first question, I want to invite our guests in the online plenum. Please use the live chat to ask, and I can integrate your question into our discussion. The first question is how children's rights could be helpful to protect children, to support them, and to give children what they need. Is there any connection between the situation which you described in your country and the discussion about children's rights? Or are these two very parallel discussions or sectors? What do you think about it? Who wants to start? Christine.
I can start. But I think the Child Rights Convention, it's quite a good tool to kind of to see what has happened in the country, how fast has the implementation gone really. I think the difficulty, what we are having in Germany, is that there is not like one person who is like getting all the threads together. So there's not an appointed person in government to be responsible for child rights issues. So there is the Ministry for Family, Children, Women, and Elderly. I think that's the correct name. And they are dealing with child rights issues, but also other ministries should also be concerned with those issues. And we have those on the government level, like national level, but we also have the so-called Länder, the provinces, the federal states who deal a lot with child rights issues. And we also have the municipalities on a different level who also deal with these issues. And there's not really a place in Germany where all of this comes together. And so I think until now it's really important to kind of push this process further and to develop this further. And that's why that's really helpful to have this Child Rights Convention to pin down politicians and to say, well, this is still missing in Germany and we need to have this person being responsible for it. I think in an everyday work of social workers and childcare workers, I would say it's not so prominent really to think about child rights in the sense of the convention. Of course, they do think about child rights, but it's not really so rights-based driven. Also, what you said, Sajid, about this kind of need-driven way social work is acting, I think the same is still happening in Germany. So we are having slowly this shift from needs-based social work to rights-based social work. There was a study a couple of years ago where someone was asking social workers about the Child Rights Convention, social workers working in the field for children and young people. And many of them, they didn't know about this convention. They couldn't really say what this convention is about. They couldn't really name any articles. They couldn't say what was new about this convention. So I think it will take a long time to really implement it in law, but also in the everyday social workers' life when they are dealing with kids. But it's good to have it, and it's good always to come back to it and say this is the global convention we came about. Yeah.
Could children's rights be a part of the answer for children? Rossi, what do you think about the situation in Bulgaria?
Yes, thank you. I would like to share about the situation in Bulgaria that actually child rights are part of the national strategic and national legislation. As I mentioned, in 2000, a child protection law was passed. And since then, the child rights are part of the national legislation. Of course, Bulgaria ratified the Convention of Child Rights, but in this law on child protection, it is very, very clear which are the bodies responsible in Bulgaria for child protection and child rights. So these are about 10 different governmental bodies but the most important one, which has the role of coordinating the efforts of all governmental bodies, is so-called State Agency for Child Protection. So it's a governmental body which is the prime subject responsible for protection of child rights and for the child well-being. So this State Agency for Child Protection coordinates the efforts of all governmental agency like Ministry of Education, Ministry of Labor and Social Policy, Ministry of Culture, etc. All these public bodies where children well-being is concerned, Ministry of Health, etc. So this is on national level, and in the municipalities, there are governmental bodies called departments for child protection. So they're located into the municipalities, and they're subordinated of the Agency of Social Assistance. So their prime function is protection of child rights. And of course, social workers there working with these issues are the main responsible to react and to work actively for child protection, for the rights of children. What I want to share with you as something which I think we could be proud as a country is the child involvement or child participation. We have so-called Child Council, which is consultative body as part of this State Agency for Child Protection. So this is a council of about 30 children, which are representatives of all regions in Bulgaria. So we have 28 regions in Bulgaria, and each of these regions, we have a clear procedure how this region could elect one representative, child representative of this region. So this council works together in close relation with the State Agency for Child Protection. So they participate in all discussions where child policies, child rights are discussed on national level. So they actively participate in all these processes for developing of child welfare policies and child protection policies. As far as I know, this Child Council also participate in different international forums where child rights and participation of children in development of social policies internationally are discussed. I also have personal impressions of the work of this Child Council, and further I could share also some results from the study we made, me and my colleagues. So we interviewed representatives of this Child Council about to what extent they think the children in Bulgaria know about their rights and to what extent these rights are actually implemented in Bulgaria.
Okay, thank you. Sajid, do you want to say something?
Yeah, as far as India is concerned, the situation is quite complex. Like there are reasons which causes which and factors which work in combination to each other as also in isolation of each other. And these are the lack of resources. These are the lack of political will. And this is also the kind of electoral politics which do not places enough importance on the children and their development directly. We also realize that in the context of development, in the context of a small family size and controlling the population, several schemes, both based on education, awareness, and incentives, as also negative incentives, have miserably failed most of the time in the country. But what has worked is, and that there is a popular saying which says development is the best contraceptive. And that wherever the development has taken place, particularly of the women population, the family size has reduced. The other social indicators have improved, but that require massive kind of expenditure, not only on the children, but also on the general population, especially women. And I think that is where the international agencies and that is where the international community must come forward to help the developing and less developed world, because otherwise having commonality of objectives and the commonality of the purpose and the standards without any kind of a support financially and otherwise will not bring desired results.
Thank you. You mentioned that the state is more or less aware of the situation of children. And there is a question from one of our guests, and I will give a chance that we can find answers for these questions. The question is, are children's rights a real chance to take children's participation in children's rights issues, or nothing more than a cover for hierarchical dependence? Is there a real change, or is it just a way on old footprints? What do you think about it?
No, I think that will bring about a major change if the provisions of the Convention of the Rights of Child and other international instruments are earnestly implemented and realized. So, because I think the children are to be seen as the national wealth, and the investment in the children is the investment in the future of the globe. So I am very optimistic that the change in the affairs regulating the lives, circumstances, and situations of the children and their immediate as also distant environments in which they grow and they develop will bring about a positive change in the affairs of the children and their development.
Okay, thank you. Christina or Rossi, do you want to react? If not, then
Maybe I can add, like from the German position, I think this participation, it slowly comes into law and it gets enforced in law. Like for what example, since now almost 2 years, in June it will be 2 years, we have this institution of ombudsperson's office, that there is a place where children who are in like foster care, who are in children's homes or other ways of social work care, they can complain if something happens to them. And before that, there was no way to really complain, and there was no ombudsperson's office really. And now this was implemented 21 in the law, and this was one result of the discussion around child rights. So I think slowly the perception is changing, and also we start to really implement it. But we do have this office now, even in this province we have this office, but I think it will take time until young people get to know about it, that they know where to talk to, where to phone, how to write emails. And it will take time that this is really known by young people, but we do start having those sort of institutions. So I think, yes, there is a change, but there's still a long way to go, really.
If I can add something for a Bulgarian context, I'm totally agree, and I'm convinced that child rights, if they are more actively involved in the official policy, this is the way to real implementation of these child rights in practice. Because if we don't have it in the legislation, how we could hope that in the reality they could be better protected. So that's why I shared with you this positive experience we have, at least in the legislation. And I could share also something positive, in my opinion, as we have as a tradition for many decades in the Bulgarian schools, for instance. We have a so-called children self-governance. So in each school, it's a long tradition. In every class of children, there are a few representatives which go to the school parliament. which is the parliament of the children. So the children could raise their voice and could actively participate in the management of the school by these actually real opportunities, because these are bodies which exist in each Bulgarian school. And of course, in some schools, these bodies function better than in others, but these child parliaments, we know this idea from Korczak and other fathers of child rights as a concept. But in my opinion, it's a good practice. I could share with you. So these child parliaments and representatives could transfer or translate the child voice better through this body which is in the legislation and into the practice.
Thank you. Sajid, is there any participation and self-government by, for, and with children in India?
Yeah, not as much in the government kind of programs and agencies, except for one of the program which is called Integrated Child Development Services, which is spread over the entire width and breadth of the country, where a more comprehensive kind of a child development, taking into account the pregnant women and their lactating mothers and young children, are taken into their fold for taking a composite kind of interventions for the development of all kinds. There, I think the mothers groups and are more in vogue as far as the participation is concerned. But there are several civil society organizations who are working for the realization of the child rights. And there are a large number of NGOs who are working in that area. They have, like, as my friend Rosie mentioned, the child parliament. There is a concept of a child-friendly village. Like, they declare a village as a child-friendly village if it fulfills certain criteria and fulfills certain markers. There are institutions like Jamia Millia Islamia, where I teach, also has a school. The education starts from preschool level to PhD level. And in the school, there is a concept for since 1920. It's called open air schooling, which the idea is that for one day in a year, the entire responsibility of running the school and holding the major responsibilities is given to the children. So a child becomes a principal, a child becomes the headmaster, child becomes teacher and everybody, and they run the whole show for one day. This is just to give them a sense of participation, as also the sense of empowerment, and also empathize with how decision making are going to be affected, and then bringing their perspective into the governance of the educational institutions, not from the adult perspective, but also from the children's perspective. But a lot more needs to be done in that area when it comes to participation of children, when it comes to policy making, as also in terms of the program implementation.
Okay, thank you. In our study program, International Social Work, there we have a lot of discussions with students about the question how we can integrate all these ideas, all our approaches into the normal day-to-day life. Which recommendation you would give our students in this question to integrate children's rights in their own work with your own experience? What do you would say to our students? Rosie, please.
If I can share, of course, in our social work programs and education programs at the university, we have some courses which are directly related to child rights, for instance, child rights or human rights. So these topics are part of the preparation of social work and pedagogy students. Other opportunities for increase this thematic in the preparation of further professionals is through participation of our partners from the practice. For instance, for many years, we collaborate with the State Agency for Child Protection, and their chair actually is part of our Quality Assurance Council or Commission at the Faculty of Education. So, for instance, for the last year, we discussed several times to what extent the child rights topic is it enough included in the preparation of the future professionals, social workers, educators, and the state agency gave some proposals how we could extend this topic in the preparation of the future professionals. And as a professional community, we of course embrace these proposals, made discussions in the faculty, and try to explore even further this and include this topic in our curriculum. So for me, it is a key topic to include these topics in the preparation of future social workers, future educations as part of their education at the university, and secondly, in-service trainings. This topic to be included in their in-service training. Once they are in the practice, they could improve their knowledge, continuously to improve their knowledge about child rights and child protection.
Okay, thank you. There are two more questions. Question number one, what are, in your opinion, the biggest challenges regarding children's rights, and what are the key issues which international social work has to tackle, especially in social work practice? Who want to answer? Sajid, please.
Yeah, my answer will be more specific to the region I belong to, because it may be different for the other regions. Reason being that, as I said in the beginning, that there is a kind of a cultural diversity, and children are viewed differently in different cultures. So the concept of authority and the concept of control while dealing with the children is more pronounced in our context, and therefore that is, to my mind, is the biggest challenge, because then the adults within the family, the immediate environment of the child, are to be educated and made aware and sensitized, because the concept that we, the adults who are the family member, maybe as the parents, elder siblings, are the best to know what the child needs and what is in the interest of the child. That perspective needs to change. And that is a very sensitive and very ticklish area, because that also, if you look at it from the power point of view, it is sharing the power of, say, doing the best for their own children, which people would not like to share with others, particularly with the outsiders. And the social worker, howsoever competent that person may be to deal with issues, it will still be seen as encroaching upon the privacy and the legitimate area where the parental control and authority should hold supreme rather than anybody outside. So, to my mind, to bring about a cultural change and in the change in the values is a long drawn kind of a process. Therefore, it is more time consuming, it is more challenging. Having said that, I would also like to share that in almost all the schools of social work, child rights, child development, child welfare by different names is an area which is taught to the students. But I still believe that the perspective remains more traditional than the, as I said, it's more of kind of a need-based or welfare-oriented than the development or rights-based oriented. So the pedagogical change is also required at the level of the schools of social work, at the level of the teachers who are teaching that course. We in Jamia, at the Department of Social Work, long back, started a diploma program in child rights with the financial support of Save the Children UK. And the whole idea was that after that, we will be mainstreaming the education of child rights, which we did. And then subsequent to that, a Center for Early Childhood Education and Development was established, which offered a master's program in early childhood education and development, which is also going on even today very successfully, and a lot of meaningful research is being done. So I think that is another kind of an academic intervention which schools of social work and the academic institutions can perform a role in giving direction to the efforts which are being made by different stakeholders in the society. Thank you.
Thank you. To the next question, you mentioned that that children's rights are a part of your law, more or less, and there is a question by a German guest, and he asked, in Germany there's a discussion about including children's rights into the constitution. Are there any similar ambitions in Bulgaria or in India?
I don't know about the constitution, but as I mentioned, the child rights are part of the Child Protection Act. And of course, we ratified the Child Rights Convention. So probably on national level, it is considered that it is well represented. The child rights are represented in the national law to a big extent. So in my opinion, as a professional, I think we have enough regulations which secure the child rights on the national policy.
Yes, there are both the constitutional provisions, not specifically with regard to children by name, but like say the prevention of discrimination on the basis of sex, age, creed, culture, etc., which protect children. Similarly, there is a constitutional provision which prevents and protect children from working if they are below the age of 14 years. There are a number of legislations which have been enacted in the country in tune with the recommendations and provisions of the Child Rights Convention, like there is the Juvenile Justice Act, which deals with juvenile offenders. There are other provisions of law, as I mentioned in 2001. The right to education has become a fundamental right where every child can demand education up to the age of 14 years, though we are still struggling with the quality of education, but that is a different game altogether. And I am sure that in the times to come, the quality will also be addressed as one of the concerns.
Thank you. Oh, and there are more and more questions. I try to focus it. And there's a question concerning children's rights and the COVID pandemic. I read, the recent COVID pandemic has rendered many children orphans. In this backdrop, what affirmative actions your respective governments have taken to ensure their well-being? Are you able to give an answer?
Yes, I want to share about Bulgaria that, as we know, it is true that during the pandemic, the COVID pandemic, the child right to education in some cases was difficult to implement it because of the socioeconomical status of the families, for instance. When the education went online, not all families had, devices, so the children to participate in these online classes. But our government made it sure that every child in such situation could receive device, so he or she could participate and to have access to education. So I could say that in this difficult situation, government actions were very relative for finding the best possible solutions for all children. So their right to education, access to education, to be fulfilled.
Okay, thank you. Christine.
I think I can say a bit the same for the German perspective in regard to the right to education. We could see there that there was quite a disparity between children who from well-off backgrounds and not so well-off backgrounds. What is interesting now that many children have quite a lack of education from those years, and there are some programs run by the national state where like schools can get money to help those kids, but this is money that schools don't take from the government. So many times we have this funding, but schools, I guess many times they're just having so much other work and are overwhelmed with other work. They're not applying for the sort of funding and this money to give it to the kids and to help them getting out of the situation. So we do have instruments and steps taken by the government, but it's not really on the ground. It's not really helping the families that they needed and the kids that they needed. So this is a quite sad situation. And I think it's also difficult for the government. How do we pass on this money to the people who need it? Yeah. And this question was also about orphans. I think if I got it right, I don't know any numbers really in Germany about that, because in Germany it mostly hit elder people who like died due to COVID. So I'm not sure about that. Can't really answer it.
Okay, thank you. Sajid.
Quick 2-3 points. One is that the well-established principle that in case of any kind of a natural disaster and calamities, the children have the first right on relief. Likewise, I think the pandemic also, the children should have had the first right on any kind of a relief. In our case, it could have been the disaster in terms of the effect on children could have been prevented, because there was a lot of migration because of the sudden announcement of the lockdown of the state of the migrant workers from urban to rural areas, with children being carried on their shoulders, and the children which were in the womb and children who were 2 months to 88 years old were carried for miles together in the scorching heat. That was certainly preventable, which was not done somehow or the other. Then there was a huge disruption in terms of the education of the children, because there is still a huge divide, which is a digital divide in terms of the access to internet by children. A large number of children living in the rural areas do not have access to the internet. So education through the IT, information technology and digital kind of platform is still a luxury for most of the children. That was hugely disrupted, and the attainments of the educational levels were severely affected by that. There were also other psychological bearing. A large number of children lost their parents during the second wave of the pandemic. I don't know what is happening to those particular children. Some NGOs have taken the lead, but there is, I think, a lack of any kind of a comprehensive, well laid out kind of a program of intervention, because that requires a long-term intervention and not a quick fix solution. Thank you.
Thank you. Before we start to talk about the relation between social work and children's rights, still a basic question. How can children's rights be human rights if children are not equal subjects of law as adults? In your opinion, are there no differences? Is anybody able to give an answer on this question?
Could you try to reword the question?
Yes. How can children's rights be human rights if children are not equal subjects of law as adults? In your opinion, are there no differences? Christine.
I think this is what comes back to the question about children's rights, if they come into the constitution or not. So if we really want to see children as part of the society and the same rights, and also like having the same right to participation, everything, then they should be named in the constitution, and then it should be the same. I think if you look at it, what it's like now, it's not equal in the law, and it's also not equal just in the attitudes the society is having towards children. So the issue of the discrimination because of age, I think, is quite huge in Germany. So we do think about participation of young people in political life and social life, and this is part of the child rights. But as soon as young people do participate in political and social life and really raise their voices, then there is a discussion if this is right or wrong. Like, for example, the Fridays for Future movement, who were talking for climate justice and decided to go on the streets on Fridays instead of going to school to protest against what we do to the world in regard to climate. And when they did that, I mean, that's participation in political life. And then there was a huge discussion, well, they're not going to school, so there should be sanctions put on them because they're not going to school. And it wasn't seen that they would, use their right of participation and freedom of speech and being part of this political process. So I think it's, right now it's quite difficult, and I think it should change, but it's not so easy. I mean, even participation in social work processes, it's always easy to say participation is good. But if it comes to the point in our institutions where kids raise their voices, do we really listen to them? Or do we just, want to do our next step because we've planned this step really well in our concept before? So this is, I think one is what we talk about, what we discuss also at university. And the other thing is what is happening on the ground if kids really raise their voices.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, social work. How do you see the role of national and international social work in this process of strengthening children's rights? Rosi.
I see it through exchange of good practices in the legislation and in the social work practice. So the countries where child rights are not so well developed and protected could adapt good practices from the legislation and from the practice of other countries where these child rights are better protected. So international social work has a very important, huge role in this direction, I believe.
Thank you.
Well, I think if we take the definitions of social work, global definition from the script to the real life, in terms of social justice, human rights, etc., that is what is required to keep these terms in the holy books of social work is not going to serve the purpose. We have to strategize in terms of what we need to do to realize the underpinning values of human rights and social justice, which is, if it is so central to social work, then how do we operationalize these concepts in our day-to-day practice? And I think we have to be more aggressively pursuing the advocacy role vis-a-vis the governments, vis-a-vis the state, vis-a-vis the international community, to make the child rights more real than merely confined to the books. So a lot of responsibility, I think, has to be borne also by International Association of Schools of Social Work, International Federation of Social Workers, and the like in US, UK, and rest of the countries. So the national kind of organizations perhaps will have to take a more progressive and aggressive role in terms of advocating the child rights.
Thank you, Christine.
I would add on this. I mean, social work is a human rights profession, so it should be in our kind of DNA that child rights are really important to us. But I think before we do advocacy and also lobbying for child rights, we should also do some self-reflection on what we are doing in our professional lives. So how much do we stick to child rights really in our daily work? Are they able to participate in decision-making processes in our institutions? Are they able to participate? I mean, even at university, how much participation is really possible? Are there complaint mechanisms really implemented? Are they only on paper, or do they work within the institutions? many times, not many times, but it happens that in an institution there's some case happening where violence was done towards a child by a social worker. And then there is the question, is this well-being of a child really important, or is it a reputation of the institution? So I think self-reflection should be like the first step, and also getting lots of knowledge about children's rights before advocacy and lobbying can really be done in a good way. So I think it's both ways. It should be, I really see the advocacy part, but I also feel like self-reflection should be part of the educational system as well for social workers.
Okay, and which are the lessons, what we learned by social work concerning children's rights and to dealing with? Is there any progress within the social work field?
Depends on the perspective. If we compare the protection of child rights 50 years ago and now, of course, there is a very positive trend. Of course, as professionals, we always strive for more. We would like more, better practices, better child involvement in decision making. But I see this positive change in more and more societies. Because if we compare it 100 years ago, the situation was even worse. And of course, it doesn't mean that we need to be calmer and, you know, just to be satisfied with the situation. As our colleague from India said, we all as professionals, with the voices we have, the organizations we could actively participate, we need to advocate more and more actively for child voices to be heard better in all national, international contexts. But still, I think there is very positive change and development for the last few decades.
Okay, thank you. Sajid.
I think in this age of evidence-based practices, what we as professionals needs to do is to collect and systematically collect and widely disseminate the evidence about our role in bringing about its strategic, nationwide, significant social justice-oriented change, which has been brought about with the help of social work profession, in order to enlighten ourselves, as also in order to convince the detractors of the social work profession who believe that these social workers are doing more of a lip service rather than doing or bringing about any kind of a major change in the society. And that is also the reason that we are not gaining as significant a recognition as the other helping professions have been able to do over the last 50 years or more. So that evidence has to be collected, that evidence has to be shared, that evidence has to be looked into, and a lot more introspection is to be done in order to make the profession more competent, more dynamic, and more change-oriented in the society.
Thank you very much. Unfortunately, we are at the end of the discussion because of the time, and I see there are some more questions in our live chat, but we have to come to the end. And I hope that you were able to get some new knowledge about the situation of children's rights in international comparison. Maybe you are also motivated to focus social work issues in international perspective. And dear guests, thank you for joining our discussion, and be invited to share our international activities at our university and also at the university in Sofia and the university in Delhi. Please be part of our international social work days, where we invite all our international partners to come to Erfurt and to collaborate together, and be invited to study international social work here in Erfurt. And thank you, dear colleagues from Germany, from Bulgaria, and from India to discuss with us the question of children's rights, and be invited to stay in contact. And I would be happy to see you also in a personal atmosphere, maybe back in Erfurt. Have a great night, a great evening, and goodbye until the next Erfurt discourse. See you, goodbye.